Welcome back. On the 27th of March, on Wednesday, the National Assembly granted its approval to the Expropriation Bill, which had been revised by the National Council of Provinces. The bill received a favourable vote of 205, while 108 members voted against it. The approval of this bill signifies the conclusion of a lengthy 16-year journey that commenced back in 2008 with the objective of replacing the outdated legislation from the apartheid era. Let's take this discussion further with the legal analyst, Dr. Gaopalelwe Mathiba. Mr. Mathiba, a pleasure to have you on the program this afternoon. Firstly, provide an overview of the Expropriation Bill and its significance in South Africa's legislative landscape. What are the key provisions of this bill?
Okay, thank you so much. Good afternoon, Nhlanhla, and warm Easter wishes and greetings to the viewers of Newzroom Afrika at home. And thanks for having me. Yes, indeed. The controversial Expropriation Bill has been on the lawmaking process for the past 16 years, correctly so. However, it has finally secured the requisite support and endorsement of both houses of parliament, which is the National Assembly and the NCOP. Now, the bill has reached its final legislative stage. That is only now awaiting for President Cyril Ramaphosa to sign it into law, into becoming the law officially. Now, this is an expropriation bill. One may wonder, what is expropriation to begin with? Expropriation simply means, the compulsory acquisition, or rather, let me say, taking of property, often land, by the state through an expropriating authority or an organ of state. So it is just as simple as that, the state using its powers to take a property or land, in most instances, to use it for the purposes that advance the public good and interest. Yeah.
Let's discuss the reported threats of litigation from several opposition parties regarding the constitutionality of this expropriation bill. What are the primary legal arguments against the bill, and how might these challenges play out in court?
Yeah, thank you so much for that interesting question, Nhlanhla. I must say that there are quite few, only two parties though. The bill has received quite an enormous support. So the only two or three few parties that taking a right-wing posture of criticizing and threatening to challenge the bill should not really be given that much airtime, because they clearly don't deserve it. Let me tell you this: most of the critical sticking issue here is a compensation, a clause around nil compensation, which basically means compensation. Expropriation of land without compensation. Meaning the government taking the land without having to pay anything. That's basically what nil compensation means. The South African compensation standard is just an equitable compensation. The Constitution requires that expropriation be carried out subject to compensation, which is just an equitable, not market value. While in many instances market value would be just an equitable, it could also be less or even more than market value. What is just an equitable has not really been adequately tested in our constitutional courts or any other court. In the case of land reform project, or challenged by the state, mostly because the state has to date not expropriated any property for land reform purposes. That is why, again, the passing of this bill would be very much important. So the issue of nil compensation, which provides, like I said, explicitly that land be expropriated without compensation, is what exactly triggers the discomfort in those right-wing, political parties that seeks to challenge this transformative move. So for the rest, the section does not change. The standard of the constitutional standard for expropriation does not change. It still remains that there be compensation with that is just an equitable, and only in very limited instances there be a nil compensation. In other words, the government having not to pay anything to the person whom his property or her property is being expropriated. So the bill is not introducing, the short and length of it is that the bill is not introducing expropriation. What the bill seeks to do is to realign the expropriation rules with the Constitution. Because remember, the current act was enacted in 1975, way before we could come into democracy. So it is basically was created during the apartheid system, and it therefore cannot continue to thrive in a constitutional dispensation.
And I'm glad you simplified in that manner. But in order for us to better understand this bill, to what extent do you believe the expropriation bill strikes, call it a balance, between protecting property rights and facilitating land reform? Are there any potential implications for property owners, investors, and the broader economy that need to be considered?
Yeah, that's quite an interesting point. Nhlanhla, one thing that I would want to say to you is that there is a compelling case for this bill. Yeah. Because it's, like I said, the transformative potential that it has. Anything that came, during the apartheid law cannot continue to thrive now. That is over and above any other argument. I know the nil compensation is the most contested clause in this bill, and reasonably so, I believe, because there is no talk of a blanket expropriation of all property or productive land without compensation. There will still be compensation that will be carried out subject to the payment of just and equitable compensation. But under certain circumstances, for instance, in cases of abandoned properties or properties that are not being put into productive use, a nil compensation will be applicable in those cases. So it's not like a blanket expropriation of property without compensation. When you look at modern economies across the world, the ownership of assets such as land has been used to unlock financial value and as leverage to build economic prosperity. It was an undisputed fact that the best faring economies in the world had used this system to build wealth, economic growth and prosperity. Ultimately, this stimulates employment and greater investment opportunities, both foreign and local or domestic. And if we don't follow suit as a country in facilitating equal access to land and redistribution of land, all these aspirations will unfortunately be defeated, and the resulting effects of that will be, the thriving, skewed distribution of land, as we currently see in South Africa, one of the most unequal country or society in the world.
And looking ahead,
so if we are really intentional about changing things and challenging the status quo, this bill has to proceed. And I hope the president will sign it into law as soon as yesterday.
And speaking about that, looking ahead, what are the next steps for the expropriation bill after its approval by the National Assembly? And what role does the president then play in the legislative process?
Thanks, Nhlanhla, for that. So the bill is almost law at this stage. The two houses of parliament, which is the National Assembly and the NCOP, have already played their part. They have already given the bill sort of a go-ahead with significant endorsement. We have seen the bill receiving from the two houses. Now, what is only left now is the signature of the president. Is for the president to sign the bill into the law so that the bill can officially become the law. And that is the final stage in the legislative process. Unless, of course, the president, in his own accord, is of the view that he still requires some clarity as per the constitutionality of the bill, of which in that case he can willy-nilly refer the bill back to the parliament for reconsideration. But at this point, I doubt the president will be doing that in his own accord. I mean, I have seen two parties, the DA and the FF Plus, threatening to challenge or to serve the papers, the court papers on the president to compel him to send this bill back to the parliament. I doubt they will be successful in that endeavor.
Thank you so much for your time. Dr. Gaopalelwe Mathiba is a legal analyst exploring the intricacies of the Expropriation Bill and also its significance in South Africa's legislative landscape.